On January 6, 1873, Pope Pius IX published the encyclical letter Quartus Supra, addressed to, quote, our venerable brothers Anthony Peter IX, Patriarch of Cilicia, and the archbishops, bishops, clergy, and laity, our beloved children of the Armenian rite, who are in loving communion with the Apostolic See, unquote. This text addresses the threat of an emerging schism in the Armenian Church, and also relates, interestingly enough, to many of the arguments made by members of the Society of St. Pius X. I will read some excerpts below, and you can find this text at papalencyclicals.net, and I'll put the link below in the description. From Pope Pius IX, quote, the chief deceit used to conceal the new schism is the name of Catholic. The originators and adherents of the schism presumptuously lay claim to this name, despite their condemnation by our authority and judgment. It has always been the custom of heretics and schismatics to call themselves Catholics and to proclaim their many excellences in order to lead peoples and princes into error. But to prove that they are Catholics, the neo-schismatics appeal to what they call a declaration of faith, published by them on February 6, 1870, which they insist disagrees in no regard with the Catholic faith. However, it has never been possible to prove oneself a Catholic by affirming those statements of the faith which one accepts, and keeping silence on those doctrines which one decides not to profess. But without exception, all doctrines which the Church proposes must be accepted, as the history of the Church at all times bears witness. That the statement of faith which they published was deceitful and sophistical is proved also by the fact that they rejected the declaration or profession of faith which was proposed to them on our authority in accordance with custom. For any man to be able to prove his Catholic faith and affirm that he is truly a Catholic, he must be able to convince the Apostolic See of this. For this See is predominant, and with it the faithful of the whole Church should agree. And the man who abandons the See of Peter can only be falsely confident that he is in the Church. As a result, that man is already a schismatic and a sinner who establishes a See in opposition to the unique See of the Blessed Peter, from which the rites of sacred communion derive for all men. This fact was well known to the illustrious bishops of the Eastern churches. Hence, at the Council of Constantinople, held in the year 536, Menas, the bishop of that city, affirmed openly with the approval of the fathers, quote, we follow and obey the Apostolic See, as your charity realizes, and we consider those in communion with it to be in communion with us, and we too condemn the men condemned by it, unquote. Even more clearly and emphatically, St. Maximus, abbot of Chrysopolis and a confessor of the faith, in referring to Pyrrhus the Monothelite, declared, quote, if he wants neither to be nor to be called a heretic, he does not need to satisfy random individuals of his orthodoxy, for this is excessive and unreasonable. But just as all men have been scandalized at him since the chief man was scandalized, so also when that one has been satisfied, all men will doubtless be satisfied. He should hasten to satisfy the Roman See before all others. For when this See has been satisfied, all men everywhere will join in declaring him pious and orthodox. For that man wastes his words who thinks that men like me must be persuaded and beguiled when he has not yet satisfied and beseeched the blessed Pope of the Holy Roman Church. From the incarnate Word of God himself, as well as from the conclusions and sacred canons of all holy councils, the Apostolic See has been granted the command, authority, and power of binding and loosing for all God's holy churches in the entire world, unquote. For this reason, John, Bishop of Constantinople, solemnly declared, and the entire Eighth Ecumenical Council did so later, quote, that the names of those who were separated from communion with the Catholic Church, that is, of those who did not agree in all matters with the Apostolic See, are not to be read out during the sacred mysteries, unquote. This plainly meant that they did not recognize those men as true Catholics. All these traditions dictate that whoever the Roman pontiff judges to be a schismatic for not expressly admitting and reverencing his power must stop calling himself Catholic. Since this does not please the neo-schismatics, they follow the example of heretics of more recent times. They argue that the sentence of schism and excommunication pronounced against them by the Archbishop of Tyana, the apostolic delegate in Constantinople, was unjust and consequently void of strength and influence. They have claimed also that they are unable to accept the sentence because the faithful might desert to the heretics if deprived of their ministration. These novel arguments were wholly unknown and unheard of by the ancient fathers of the Church, for, quote, the whole Church throughout the world knows that the see of the blessed Apostle Peter has the right of loosing again what any pontiffs have bound, since this see possesses the right of judging the whole Church, and no one may judge its judgment, unquote. The Jansenist heretics dared to teach such doctrines as that an excommunication pronounced by a lawful prelate could be ignored on a pretext of injustice. Each person should perform, as they said, his own particular duty, despite an excommunication. Our predecessor of happy memory, Clement XI, in his Constitution Unigenitus, against the errors of Quesnel, forbade and condemned statements of this kind. These statements were scarcely in any way different from some of John Wycliffe's, which had previously been condemned by the Council of Constance and Pope Martin V. Through human weakness, a person could be unjustly punished with censure by his prelate, but it is still necessary, as our predecessor St. Gregory the Great warned, quote, for a bishop's subordinates to fear even an unjust condemnation, and not to blame the judgment of the bishop rashly, in case the fault which did not exist, since the condemnation was unjust, develops out of the pride of heated reproof, unquote. But if one should be afraid even of an unjust condemnation by one's bishop, what must be said of those men who have been condemned for rebelling against their bishop and this apostolic see, and tearing to pieces as they are now doing by a new schism the seamless garment of Christ, which is the Church? But the neo-schismatics say that it was not a case of doctrine but of discipline, so the name and prerogatives of Catholics cannot be denied to those who object. Our Constitution, Reversurus, published on July 12, 1867, answers this objection. We do not doubt that you know well how vain and worthless this evasion is, for the Catholic Church has always regarded as schismatic those who obstinately oppose the lawful prelates of the Church, and in particular the chief shepherd of all. Schismatics avoid carrying out their orders, and even deny their very rank. Since the faction from Armenia is like this, they are schismatics, even if they had not yet been condemned as such by apostolic authority. For the Church consists of the people in union with the priest and the flock following its shepherd. Consequently, the bishop is in the Church, and the Church in the bishop, and whoever is not with the bishop is not in the Church. Furthermore, as our predecessor Pius VI warned in his apostolic letter condemning the civil constitution of the clergy in France, discipline is often closely related to doctrine and has a great influence in preserving its purity. In fact, in many instances, the holy councils have unhesitatingly cut off from the Church by their anathema those who have infringed its discipline. But the neo-schismatics have gone further, since, quote, every schism fabricates a heresy for itself to justify its withdrawal from the Church, unquote. Indeed, they have even accused this apostolic see as well, as if we had exceeded the limits of our power in commanding that certain points of discipline were to be observed in the Patriarchate of Armenia. Nor can the Eastern churches preserve communion and unity of faith with us without being subject to the apostolic power in matters of discipline. Teaching of this kind is heretical, and not just since the definition of the power and nature of the papal primacy was determined by the Ecumenical Vatican Council. The Catholic Church has always considered it such and abhorred it. Thus, the bishops at the Ecumenical Council of Chalcedon clearly declared the supreme authority of the Apostolic See in their proceedings. Then they humbly requested from our predecessor St. Leo confirmation and support for their decrees, even those which concerned discipline. Accordingly, then, unless they abandon the unchanging and unbroken tradition of the Church, which is so clearly confirmed by testimonies of the Fathers, the neo-schismatics can in no way convince themselves that they are Catholics, even if they declare themselves such. If we did not thoroughly know the clever and subtle deceits of heretics, it would be incomprehensible that the Ottoman regime still regards as Catholics people it knows to be cut off from the Catholic Church by our judgment and authority. For if the Catholic religion is to continue safe and free in the Ottoman dominion, as the Emperor has decreed, then the essence of this religion should also be allowed, for instance, the primacy of jurisdiction of the Roman pontiff. Most men feel that the Church's supreme head and shepherd should decide who are Catholics and who are not. But the neo-schismatics declare that they do not oppose the Catholic Church's principles in the least. Their sole aim is to protect the rights of their churches and their nation, and even the rights of their supreme emperor. They falsely allege that we have infringed these rights. By this means, they fearlessly make us responsible for the present disorder. Exactly in this way did the Acacian schismatics act towards our predecessor St. Gelasius, and previously the Arians falsely accused Liberius, also our predecessor, to the Emperor Constantine because Liberius refused to condemn St. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, and refused to support their heresy. For as the same holy pontiff Gelasius wrote to the Emperor Anastasius on this matter, quote, "A frequent characteristic of sick people is to reproach the doctors who recall them to health by appropriate measures rather than agree to desist from and condemn their own harmful desires." Unquote. These appear to be the main grounds on which the neo-schismatics gain their support and solicit the patronage of powerful men for their cause, most wicked as it is. Lest the faithful be led into error, we must deal with these grounds more fully than if we merely had to refute unjust accusations. Unquote. Pope Pius IX, encyclical Quartus Supra. In a separate encyclical, Quae in Patriarchatu, Pope Pius IX also said, quote, "What good is it to proclaim aloud the dogma of the supremacy of St. Peter and his successors? What good is it to repeat over and over declarations of faith in the Catholic Church and of obedience to the Apostolic See when actions give the lie to these fine words? Moreover, is not rebellion rendered all the more inexcusable by the fact that obedience is recognized as a duty? Again, does not the authority of the Holy See extend as a sanction to the measures which we have been obliged to take, or is it enough to be in communion of faith with this See without adding the submission of obedience, a thing which cannot be maintained without damaging the Catholic faith? In fact, venerable brothers and beloved sons, it is a question of recognizing the power of this See, even over your churches, not merely in what pertains to faith, but also in what concerns discipline. He who would deny this is a heretic. He who recognizes this and obstinately refuses to obey is worthy of anathema." Unquote. Pope Pius IX, encyclical Quae in Patriarchatu. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.